Good evening. Oh, I like that. I'll try it one more time. Good evening. Well, it's so nice to have all of you here this evening at Longwood Gardens. I'm Paul Redman. I'm the president and CEO of this amazing organization. Not only do we have you here tonight to learn more about our Longwood Reimagined project, but we have several hundred people online that are watching from afar as well. So it's my pleasure to welcome them to be with us tonight as well. And so, in addition to you being here tonight, I'm joined this evening by our magnificent design team that you're going to hear from in just a moment. They've been a part of something that has helped us to realize one of the most ambitious revitalization projects in our history since our founder passed away in 1954. And I just want to call them out real quickly, and there'll be more introductions, and you're going to hear from them in a moment. But I would like to recognize Marion Weiss and Michael Manfredi from Weiss Manfredi. If you'll just raise your hands over there, please. And then our amazing landscape architects, Kristin Frederickson and Eric Kramer of Hilderbrand. So you'll hear from them in just a moment. So as I mentioned, Longwood Reimagined represents our most ambitious expansion in more than a century and advances our legacy of innovation and our commitment to garden design, architecture, and preservation while advancing our mission of bringing joy and inspiration to everyone through the beauty of nature. Longwood is a collection of great cultural landscapes. I know all of you know us for the beautiful flowers, but the next time you're walking around, look at our gardens as a collection of great landscapes. The notion of collecting gardens began with our founders, Pierre S. and Alice Dupont, who were passionate about the great gardens of France and Italy. And in particular, they were passionate and fond of estates such as Vaux-le-Vicomte, Villa Gambaraia, Villa d'Este, and others. You can walk around Longwood and see those inspirations here. So today, Longwood is now a curated collection of great landscapes of the 20th and 21st centuries set within one property. This is a place where any student of landscape architecture, garden design, or architecture now can come and study, learn, and be inspired. And it's important to note that this factor and this notion of Longwood being a collection of gardens, this is one of the things that distinguishes us from all other gardens around the world. Weiss Manfredi and Hilderbrand's work now joins our storied collection of gardens and glasshouses. We are truly so fortunate to have found these incredible partners who not only share our vision for Longwood's future, but have an intuitive understanding and deep, and I'd say profound appreciation for our legacy here at Longwood. Longwood Reimagined, a new garden experience, is more than just new gardens and new buildings. It's a journey. And I trust that all of you have been here to experience Longwood Reimagined and all the new additions. This transformation has expanded the public spaces, and this hasn't been an easy feat at all because they're right in the heart of our gardens. And this included claiming back land that was used for staging areas and staff parking. Our designs teams then found a way to connect this acreage from our eastern entrance to our western grove, and in doing so, they have offered a newly unified but continually varied journey from lush formal gardens to views over open meadows of our beautiful Pennsylvania Brandywine Valley. The showstopper, of course, is our new West Conservatory, a 32,000 square foot glass house designed by Weiss Manfredi, with gardens and pools designed by Hilderbrand. It is unlike any other conservatory in the world. Typically, conservatories have many different areas that are devoted to collections of plants, and it's a really important notion for you to keep in mind because that's not what we do here at Longwood. We have collections and we make commitments to plant collections, but our modus and method is to display these collections as gardens and gardens under glass. And Hilderbrand, for the very first time, has created one cohesive Mediterranean-inspired landscape garden under glass just for us. There is an element of the project that is particularly dear to my heart and all of my colleagues here at Longwood and everyone that's been involved in the project. and it's been very important to our Longwood experience. And it's the relocation of the extant garden in North America designed by Roberto Burle Marx, the renowned Brazilian landscape architect. Burle Marx designed our Cascade Garden in 1992 with an existing greenhouse in our conservatory complex. So we basically said, Roberto, here, create a garden in this space. This is where we want you to make it work. And this happened in 1992. So the space was retrofitted to accommodate the hundreds of tropical plants. And as you can imagine, the garden, which is richly textured in an ensemble of plants, it had outgrown that aging space. I know all of you remember that small conservatory at the southwest corner of the former conservatory complex. So now we have this beautiful custom-built new glass house for this historically significant garden, recreated down to its very pavers. And again, no other garden in the world or entity has reconstructed and relocated a garden as an act of preservation as we have done in this project. And then finally, there is our new bonsai courtyard and workshop that has brought to the forefront our world-class collection of bonsai, thanks to the generosity of Doug Paul and the Kennett Collection. Before I introduce the design team, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Longwood Foundation for their support of the project and the many other partners in the community, and in particular, Bancroft Construction, who helped realize our vision for Longwood Reimagined. Now it's time for you to hear from the Longwood Reimagined design team. And you're first going to hear from Weiss Manfredi, followed by Reed Hilderbrand. And it's important for you to know that we are not going to be opening up the floor for questions. We're going to have a Q&A session after they speak, in which I'll facilitate the questions. But all of you are welcome to stay afterwards to meet Marion and Michael and Eric and Kristin so that you can ask your questions at that time. So before Marion and Michael come to the stage, and Kristin and Eric, I just want to provide brief introductions. So Marion Weiss is a co-founder of Weiss Manfredi Architecture, Landscape, Urbanism, and she's the Graham Chair Professor of Practice at the University of Pennsylvania. In 2017, Marion was honored by Architectural Record with the Women in Architectural Design Leader Award. Marion was born in California and received her Master of Architecture from Yale University and Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Virginia. Michael Manfredi is co-founder of Weiss Manfredi Architecture, Landscape, Urbanism, and he's a senior design critic at Harvard University. Michael was born in Trieste, Italy, and he grew up in Rome. He completed his undergraduate education in the United States at Notre Dame and received his Master of Architecture at Cornell University. Michael has taught design studios at several universities, including Yale, University of Pennsylvania, and most recently at Harvard University, where he teaches urban design studios that focus on larger interdisciplinary questions that connect architecture to pressing urban and environmental challenges. Marion and Michael are fellows of the American Institute of Architects and inductees into the National Academy of Design and recipients of the 2019 Residence Fellowship at the American Academy in Rome. Other awards or recognition, and we don't have the time to list all of them here tonight, but I just want to give you a few of them because these are significant. The other awards and recognitions include the Award in Architecture from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the 2024 Louis Kahn Award, the 2020 Thomas Jefferson Foundation Medal in Architecture, the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Architecture, and they were named one of North America's Emerging Voices by Architectural League of New York. The firm has also been honored by New York AIA Gold Medal and with the Tau Sigma Delta Gold Medal awarded to one individual or firm in the world each year. The firm's projects have been featured in exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, the Venice Architectural Biennial, the Guggenheim Museum, the Sao Paulo Biennial of International Architecture and Design, and the Shanghai Biennial. So I think all of you get the idea about Marion and Michael's significance, right? And they recently published a book, Public Nature's Evolutionary Infrastructures, which they may mention during their talk. Eric Kramer, he's a principal at Reed Hilderbrand. Eric's work focuses on questions of what landscapes communicates to and about their communities, whether cherished memories, bold aspirations, or contested histories. And it's important for you to know that Eric actually wrote the white paper that established the case for our methodology for relocating the Cascade Garden, with input from others in the design team, of course. So through 2 decades working within consequential landscapes across the United States, he has guided the renewal and enrichment of numerous campuses, cultural institutions, and urban districts. Eric has been responsible for major works that include the Clark Institute, Boston Central Wharf, Duke University Student Life Precinct, and a comprehensive interpretive plan for the Alamo in San Antonio. And Eric is a Philadelphia boy with a city that's rich in garden history, and I know that he has a love and fondness and from his childhood memories from here at Longwood. Kristin Frederickson, she's a principal at Reed Hilderbrand as well. Kristin's work has centered on historically and culturally significant sites for private, institutional, and public clients, and on how to honor legacy while meeting the moment of our time. Kristin brings an uncompromising commitment to the specificity of a site and to engaging questions of beauty, authenticity, performance, and equity. Those are without a doubt themes of Kristin's throughout the entire design process. Kristin has been with Reed Hilderbrand since 2006. She has contributed to the design and implementation of many well-known projects, including the Cranbrook 2030 Vision Plan and the rehabilitation and expansion of the Edwin Lutyens designed estate Marsh Court, for which the firm received the ASLA Award of Excellence. Kristin has taught at Harvard Graduate School of Design, and she's been a design critic at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, RISD, and Northeastern University, and among many others. Kristin earned her MLA, Masters of Landscape Architecture, with distinction from the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and she holds an undergraduate degree in English and Studio Art from Williams College. So now it's my pleasure to ask Marion and Michael to come to the stage to tell their story. So Marion and Michael.
Thank you, Paul, for such an extraordinarily generous introduction. We often sit and go, who is Paul talking about? But it's an incredible privilege to be here this evening. And for us as designers, an incredible privilege to work on a project that is as unique as Longwood. We've often said that this is a project of a lifetime. I hope there are other projects like this. But it's not likely that it will be of this scale and this level of ambition.
I think, we're going to share our presentation as we've been lucky enough, in a sense, to share this adventure with the incredible leadership of Longwood Gardens, Paul in particular, and his incredible team, Sharon Loving. There's more people here effectively at Longwood that have been central to making this dream actually come alive. We're also lucky to be representing our team and our firm and our collaborators with Reed Hilderbrand of speaking first here, but really we feel like over 100 years before us, there was something that had a DNA in here that had both delight, joy, conviction, and excellence and beauty as really the cornerstones of what could be the foundation for Longwood Reimagined. So we'll try and unpack it for you in a very compressed period of time.
So it's hard to not talk about architecture and landscape, buildings and gardens without thinking globally. And that, I think, was at the root or at the core of the DNA that I think makes Longwood Longwood, and certainly crucial to Pierre Dupont's vision of the world. So the sense of nature and beauty that Paul talked about as being essential is, of course, rooted in a much larger environment. It's an environment that's changing radically in unexpected ways, but it's also an environment that has social consequence, and that's what great gardens and great architecture engage. We love the sense that a project like this, certainly for Pierre Dupont, who traveled all over the world, has an antecedent to Marion. I love the sense that the Roman house is centered around a courtyard, in effect, a garden. We also love the idea that if you were Emperor Tiberius, you had the luxury to cultivate flowers and exotic vegetables. So maybe this is a very early example of the idea of a conservatory. But we also know that the intersection of nature and beauty was crucial to the medieval garden. Medieval garden existed in kind of two realms. There was a secular realm, which you see depicted here, the beginnings of ideas of chivalry and the sense of a place in the natural world, but also there's a kind of religious garden that came out of the monastic tradition. And that kind of idea of a religious garden, of course, reached a kind of an apogee in the sense of the Mughal gardens of India and the Middle East, the sort of sense that a garden is first and foremost a representation of paradise. And we love to think that this is still a valid idea of thinking about a garden. And by the way, the gardens were always framed by a kind of architectural set of elements that set them aside from the quotidian life of the city. And this kind of idea, I think, of cultivation first started to kind of reach a certain kind of level of energy, if you will, in the Enlightenment, where the emerging idea of science and botany also, I think, was in a way perceived as an important cultural element. It's interesting that culture and cultivation share the same root. So you can start to see the beginnings in the 1600s of a kind of a scientific idea. And I should mention, of course, there's a long lineage of Italian and French gardens, which you see, I think, right behind you, that Pierre Dupont was acutely aware of and very interested in. But the idea of the conservatory as a structure, as an architectural element, I think in some ways kind of first became a kind of a building type of great importance with the Crystal Palace, which is George Paxton's idea of taking beauty and innovation. This was structural innovation, the idea of prefabrication, and turning it into a public spectacle. The idea of something that could be open to the public suddenly became not just for the nobility, but for the larger public. And of course, that's crucial to, I think, Pierre Dupont's great gift to all of us, the sense of taking a gem like this and making it public. So the idea of the garden in the park, the idea of public and park, which I think are interesting combinations, are what we found inspirational when we first had the pleasure of visiting Longwood. So again, Pierre Dupont, I think, had a sense of wisdom that I think we're still enjoying. And also, I think what we've come to realize when we started thinking about this project and working with the Longwood team is the larger narrative, which is the evolution of a crystalline ridge. Pierre Dupont, in a way, was a proto lover of landscapes. So he was also, in addition to a lover of gardens, a lover of conservation. And that is a story that I think is increasingly important here. So the sense is that we, I think, started with a level of humility. Wanted to look at Pierre Dupont's idea of building along a ridge. And so it was an idea of how can we develop a series of gardens, buildings, think about planning that would, in a way, acknowledge Pierre Dupont's legacy, but also think about concentrating the buildings and the gardens in a way that the larger, beautiful landscape of the Brandywine Valley, which is so inspiring to us, could be preserved.
Now, if you look at this, some of you have been members of Longwood for a very long time, and you may remember that there was a collection of smaller greenhouses that you could see on the right-hand side of the screen. Is that right? The right hand? Sorry, stage left, sorry. The left-hand side of your screen. But you'll also see parking, and you'll see in the distance that low flat roof building being a fairly modest office building collection. So there was really, in many ways, so much planning on your right side, and then in a sense, so much idiosyncratic evolution to the west. And that idiosyncratic evolution was one where these kind of collections of greenhouses, each one lovely, but they were one after another with, you know, a sort of an idiosyncratic way that you weren't sure if you'd seen some or none or all of it. And you could even see that the arrival was something that was still nascent and where asphalt, in a sense, had a greater role than one would want to have in a garden like this. And so as we started to think about what was so compelling and so magical, and we feel blessed to have been working on this project for, Paul, is it 14 years? That's a really long time. And to think about the kind of planning when there's so many different buildings, so many different gardens, some historic renovations, some new, many things that are new that should feel as if they've always been here, and some things that are new that should look like they're inventing the future. Two things came to mind for us. And one was that Pierre Dupont really said, let's build on the ridge and let's put that glass palace on the ridge to add transparency to a world of architecture rather than opacity. But it was crystalline with the kind of the typical roofs. But over to the west, though, the Bondi Hill, the Brandywine, Wyeth country couldn't be more vivid. So that wandering topography was something that seemed as striking to us as the architecture and the gardens here indoors under glass. So we decided what would happen if we could weave together these two worlds, that of topography that wanders and is open-ended, and that of these beautiful gardens as we know them today. And so what you can start to see here in this kind of first armature is recognizing that with this collection of gardens under glass, there was also a relationship of architecture and then a framed garden and then the architecture of a glass house and then a framed garden, including the water lily court, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is still completing construction. But you can see that there's an incredible loop or journey that became very important because this is sectionally dynamic. We're at one level and then directly above it, 22 feet above us, you feel you're at grade level 2, but in fact, there's trees growing directly over your head, 4 feet of soil over you right now. So all of these things needed to be strung together, but the relationship of water, structure, gardens are along that crystalline ridge. So if we think about the sequence of gardens and conservatories, for us, one of the most important things was to think about, we also had a new building that would support the kind of life of the staff and continuing education that goes on here. Water Lily Court needed to come in focus. Roberta Burley Marx's beautiful vision needed to find a new home. And even when the question of a restaurant came up and where would you put a new building, you'll find out more about what that question triggered. But all of it really was about respecting the fact that the ensemble of these gardens and these elements of glass houses and structures were in many ways blessed already with the first effort that in a sense preceded all this transformation, this round of transformations, which is right behind you, which is the main fountain garden. And so in a sense, the gift of display and beauty was already in motion following really nearly 100 years ago, this kind of vision of invention. And that's what we want to note is that DuPont was not only so visionary about what he would preserve here with Pierce's Woods, but what he would bring in terms of spectacle and invention and innovation, because he was an engineer as well. So we'll talk about this in chapters because indeed these things fall in chapters that are moving in a sense from the east to the west and focusing first on the Water Lily Court and the kind of relocation of the Roberta Burley Marx garden. As Paul mentioned, it was in the southwest corner and many people used to say, what? I don't remember it because sometimes you could miss it. And yet in learning more about how very, very important this particular garden was, very rare, the only one in the United States under glass, to be able to actually bring that history forward, illuminate it, celebrate it, and find a new home was a very involved process that we'll talk a little further about.
So for us as architects, this is, I think, in a way, an act of humility. It's an act of preservation where we need to be humble about taking this extraordinary garden, giving it a new environment that would allow it to thrive and allow it to be enjoyed by a greater group of folks. And I think our colleagues will talk a little bit more about this as well. It's a very rich and interesting story. But Burley Marx was an incredible individual. He was a painter, a sculptor, and a garden designer of incredible inventiveness, but also a conservator who appreciated the beauty of native vegetation. So for us as architects, it was really to respect the garden that was reconstructed with a huge effort on the part of Reed Hilderbrand. So our role was to kind of give this a new home that used the same kind of chroma, the same light quality, kind of that sort of being in the jungle under a canopy. So the quality of glass is very different from the conservatory. It's darker. It recognizes the kind of incredibly vivid shades of green and the important palette. And you can start to see that the building itself, while it doesn't have the kind of bravura of the main conservatory, acknowledges the different light levels that are so important to this rather fragile garden. And the sense, again, I think a nod to our colleagues, the sense that by positioning this in a very strategic place, this kind of gift, this hidden gift could become central to the experience at Longwood. So there's also an opportunity, as you can see in this image, to look out. So there's always a sense of where you are, the geography as a visitor, a sense of being able to look into a beautiful garden like this, but also a sense of looking out. Also a sense of what this might be in the evening. There's a kind of incredible grove of ginkgos. We love the sense that the architecture and the landscape are always in careful balance. So here the symmetry of the building is in a way in dialogue with the symmetry of the grove. It's a sense that at times is very quiet. So you kind of, it has a whisper to it. And then, of course, once you're inside, the extraordinary garden in a way sings. But as part of the effort that is still underway, the recognition that also the Water Lily Court by Sir Peter Shepherd, a great landscape architect, in some ways will be another companion to the Burley Marks and the Conservatory. So here it was an attempt to give this great garden a little bit of a frame, like taking a picture, and by framing it, you kind of give it definition. So this was earlier, you may remember, maybe around 2019, 2018. And when it's complete, there'll be a colonnade, which is currently underway, but the Water Lily Court will be restored, completely ADA accessible. And then in the evening, as you can start to see, will become part of the spectacle that is so unique at Longwood, this kind of evening experience that I think is completely unique. So we could quickly walk across this sort of, as Marion said, the kind of belvedere, and talk a little bit about the restaurant and the extraordinary views that are offered by standing above us.
So some of you may remember what was here where we are right now. And what was here basically was an incredible retaining wall and a big sort of bit of lawn and a very wide walkway. And when Longwood was interested in finding maybe a way to rejuvenate the restaurant, some of the questions came about as well, where would you put it? And so our thought was, well, wouldn't it be amazing to hide it in plain sight? Because if we could hide it in plain sight behind that retaining wall, what we could do, and if you could look behind you now in light, sort of recognizing in the winter the very magic of the fountain, we could actually dig underneath. We could actually go through the wall, create these walls that could support the 4 feet of soil and trees that are directly above you. And so in effect, not build a new structure, but hide a structure in plain sight. So that's what we are in right now, where some of you may have had a chance to look at the restaurant. But what's so amazing is that rather than adding something, in some ways, by taking away the earth and carving a series of vaults that actually could be in dialogue with the main fountain garden, one would have a sense that it was hard to remember that it wasn't always this way. And that's what we wanted. As much as we love doing really big, bold, beautiful things, this was one moment to be able to have something that will, especially with the espalier magnolia vines growing outside, will at some point disappear, except for the windows and the view. But it's really that sense that the windows and the views out to the garden and the connections between inside and outside are very much the gift of Longwood Gardens. And it's a gift even in the wintertime of being able to be connected to that extraordinary landscape and to the main fountain garden. This ensemble then is something that becomes very, very different. We got a little obsessed because we felt so lucky to be able to do a restaurant here, particularly knowing that our passion for landscape and our passion for bringing architecture and landscape together would be embraced, supported, and really taken to a new level by the fact that there are plants growing inside. The food is, the salads that you'll have flowers that you would never imagine would ever be picked off a vine and put in your dishes. But what you'll see here is these vaults that you see here are the most acoustically high-performing vaults you can ever have, because so many experiences in restaurants count on sound not being overwhelming. The palette is very much the palette of the garden. So if you look out at the herbs that are directly outside the window, it's the very same palette that's been brought inside. But we were especially lucky and blessed to be able to, and you can see the bar on the one side and one of the views out to the garden. Again, the whole point of this is that connection to the landscape. But one of the things that we were so fortunate about is that Longwood has a relationship with an organization here, Delaware, called the Challenge Program. And the Challenge Program actually teaches a lot of people a whole skill set that's involved with woodwork at a very fine level. And so what you can start to see is if you're looking here, we actually took the shape of the ginkgo leaf, and with all the effectively the wood that could not be preserved on site for the trees, that was kiln dried, planed, and then actually brought into creating the furniture that's in the room next door. This is one of the ones, so in working with the challenge program, we were able to do some very interesting bespoke live edge pieces. And so you're looking at one of them right here. But in a sense, for us, the kind of enfilade of this long, almost train-like proportion of a space is magical because it is intimate. And there is that sense that even though it's a long stretch of a space, particularly in the restaurant, it's broken into several chapters, including at the far end here, you could see that we designed, really from photographs of Longwood, we designed an acoustical tapestry at one end here on fabric, and you'll see its companion in the restaurant as well, so that you would never not have that connection to the garden. And again, that leads to really the question of how do you build a community and how do you keep a community thriving as we think about that movement towards sort of work-life education and learning.
So one of the aspects that we found extraordinary about Longwood is that there's an incredibly robust educational program, and many of you, I think, are aware of that. So how to actually take what had been a series of smaller spaces and bring the educational program and some of the administrative spaces together into one center, one building called the Grove, was for us actually another chapter that I think spoke to not only Pierre Dupont's vision, but also I think the aspirations of how Longwood is moving forward. So we joke this was the former Paul and Sharon. It's kind of a Taco Bell architecture. I hope none of you are fond of it, but nevertheless, what we were able to do is save the foundations and the structure. So wherever possible, we've tried to save rather than tear down. But this was a project that should not be saved. So it also, I think, halfway through construction, happily became an opportunity to host the extraordinary collection, the bonsai collection. And I know that Kristin and Eric will talk about that. But it also connects to the potting shed, which is a very beautiful and humble building, but I think very important to Pierre Dupont's idea of this being a working garden. So the potting shed is now an opportunity to understand how bonsais are in a way sculpted and cared for, and becomes a kind of a new didactic or pedagogical chapter in the Longwood history. So we love the sense that the potting shed has a new life now, and it's an opportunity to kind of, again, think about culture and cultivation coming together in new ways. The Grove, the building that houses not only the educational programs, but also the administrative functions, we thought would be important to bathe it in natural light, bring as much natural light so we can, in fact, harvest natural light, reduce energy consumptions, and in a way bring the diverse community of departments and horticulturalists in one setting. And it's also an opportunity, as Marion said, the challenge program, there are opportunities to find ways in which we could save as much of the trees on site and use them in interiors. So we'd like to think that we're capturing north light, which is the most even light, keeping the kind of energy conservation down to a minimum, but also recognizing that natural light and plantings are kind of a social and psychological benefit. We now know that the science of biophilia is telling us that there are real metrics about bringing the kind of landscape inside. And it's something that we've been particularly interested in our own work. There's a library with an extraordinary collection. So scholars and horticulturalists can come here, and whether they care about the gardens, they can certainly learn about the history of horticulture. And of course, there are always views into the Brandywine, which again is a great source of inspiration that Marion will talk about in the shaping of the conservatory. And then at night, we'd like to think that this is a kind of a giant trellis. It's sort of a building masquerading as a trellis garden. And of course, it changes over the course of the evening from dawn to dusk. And then, of course, early morning has a kind of similar quality. So I think as Paul mentioned, I think the most consequential part, the sort of jewel on this necklace of buildings and gardens for us is the conservatory.
So the conservatory, in many ways, became an opportunity to balance the historic conservatory with something that in many ways could be a sibling, but also be forward-looking and build on that original spirit of innovation and invention that so inspired us about DuPont's thinking. And so you can start to see it really as being the kind of extension of the crystalline ridge, a piece of rolling topography, in this case in steel and glass, to host a garden that you'll learn more about. But in some ways, when you think about when you're hosting a garden, here at Longwood, they do something a little bit different than what you could say some of the goals of many conservatories have been, which is to make the space as vast and as column-free as it can possibly be to be able to let the gardens be the protagonists, which for us was a little bit like saying, do you want to make a football field and then put a garden in it? So our thought was, isn't there something more beautiful about inhabiting, say, a grove of trees and the way that they might come together so that the stands of what those views are a kind of structure that has a cathedral quality without necessarily the kind of overwhelming architectural structures. So the sense of basically being inspired by some of those lower greenhouses that we are relocating to other places, but also thinking about this sense of the kind of marriage of trees that shape space led to really the thinking of working on a bespoke structure, which we had incredible engineers, MKA, we had incredible fabricators in Germany to be able to do this very, very delicate and yet large span structure. Every element of it is different, and you can start to see this structure, no column, no beam, and these things are branching, arching like tree branches to become both columns and, in a sense, lateral structures. This is a hard-working building. In fact, there's a lot in the subsurface in the original conservatory, a lot in terms of the air distribution from below, but in this case, we're doing new contemporary, all in effect passively activated by a monitor on the roof of the Grove building that actually reads climate, wind, etc., so that it is a fully operable perimeter at 32,000 square feet. Every single panel can move and is activated, can be completely open. There's 3,000 linear feet of earth ducts because the temperature of the earth is about 55 degrees, so that helps cool things down in the summer and helps warm things up in the winter. So it's really getting you there faster. All the water collection has been taken off the roof, and so we're doing water storage, water conservation. And in a sense, the natural ventilation is making this an active, living, breathing building with a 100% active perimeter and then a 40% active roof. And so, in a sense, what's so interesting is that you can start to see it coming together. And in effect, the engineering becomes very invisible, and yet the subsurface is really the hardworking engine behind what you see that appears to just be a crystalline glass house. You can see those earth tubes, you can see the water collection tanks, all of those underway. And yet really all of this is committed to the very gift that Longwood has been committed to, which is making their gardens a place not just of collections, but a place of beauty. And so the relationship of this structure then to what starts to look towards inventing a new botanic infrastructure is really what you should hopefully be experiencing when you're there today.
I'll just move back because in some ways, our colleagues who I think we've enjoyed collaborating with to such an extent, you'll start to see it's almost impossible to show a slide and not talk about the gardens. And similarly, when our colleagues talk about the gardens, not to talk about the architecture. And we love the sense that these two worlds are seamlessly woven together. So it is, in a way, a piece of botanic infrastructure. And again, a nod to Pierre Dupont's inventiveness as an incredibly creative engineer, and the sense that climate is changing. So there's a larger environmental and social story that could be told. We love the sense that this becomes a cathedral in a way that acknowledges the beautiful collection and the kind of shimmering water. So the quality of light changes over the course of the day. And we love the sense that you could come to this conservatory early morning and have a completely different experience than you would in the late afternoon. Similarly, Marion talked about the reciprocity between architecture and nature. And for us as architects, nature is the great teacher. So the beautiful sycamore plane trees, in a way, are a lesson in structural logic that for us became important. So you start to see columns become beams, just as tree trunks become limbs. So that sense of a conversation with the natural world for us is extremely important and also humbling. I think we should always remember that whatever kind of architecture we do as architects, there's a kind of larger order out there. The sense is that the roof moves. Marion talked about the topography of the roof, the sense that it, like the Brandywine, has a kind of gentle ebb and flow. So the perspective changes. There's a sort of idea of perspectival convergence. Like in a golf course, sometimes you can make things appear longer, shorter. So that sense of playing with perspective and again, the reciprocity between the structure and the garden becomes important. At times, we love the kind of serendipity of these beautiful 3 cedar trees, and the sort of sense that they are playing with the architecture. Again, as the light changes, elements like this become more dramatic. Or the shot was taken at about 6 o'clock in the afternoon during the summer, so that setting light becomes a protagonist that is every bit as important as the architecture and the garden. At times from a distance, you can start to see it framed. It becomes a kind of a conservatory that has a sort of topography to its roof, again, acknowledging the importance of place. At times, I think our colleagues will talk about the importance of water. The building's reflected, so it has, in a way, a multiplicity of different sides and different impressions. And at times it scoops down. Again, it has a kind of topography. We sort of say it almost kisses the earth and then rises up on both sides to be much more emphatic.
And in fact, though, this living, breathing question is a super interesting thing, particularly in the times that we live in, where climate is changing. And in a sense, we're creating an artificial climate that is something that you can experience in the winter as a place of warmth, and just the opposite in the summer. So you can see the roof activated here. And in many ways, what was so interesting was actually trying to figure out how to get this automated roof and wall vents to be optimized airflow and feature and bird foot safe, dots on the glass. And, this is a very complicated thing that ideally has an effortless ability now to support the garden and the experience inside. So much work went into designing this reflected ceiling plan. So if anybody's ever designed architecture, it's all about what's up there that actually allows you, if you do it well, to have something that looks effortless. So in many ways, so as we start to look at this, you're seeing in this particular GIF, if you will, a high-speed version of what it means for it to be living, breathing. There's the roof actually being, through displacement or ventilation, we're drawing air in from the side, it's rising up, particularly if it's warm, and we're getting the benefit of the water to actually get additional cooling from that displacement ventilation. So it's a bit of an indoor-outdoor machine. In some ways, that kind of machinery in many ways is done in the simplest technologies, and others are far more sophisticated. And this is just a rack and piston ceiling support. But what we love is that there is that moment, particularly as it kind of shutters, that you could see that catenary dip where Michael was describing the kiss, if you will, of this long building closer to the earth. That magic, particularly around a sunset moment, is that the building feels small and delicate and not imposing at all. And that question of what it means to be part of this ensemble of buildings and a collection that grows over time, that somehow feels both surprising but effortless, is one where crossing that threshold across the water to enter this place that changes by day and by night, and ultimately is a place where we've never been able to see it look the same from the same photographs ever. And that's an amazing thing, because we love to think of change as something architecture can do, but it rarely does as actively as it can when it's transparent and in service of a garden. And so finally, I think we'll close with the sense that for us, it's an incredible joy and delight. We were eavesdropping on the kind of early members' days, and people were gathering around and looking at it and trying to remember what was there. But we were able to stand there and listen to their conversations and see the trees that inspired the shape of those structures reflected in the glass, and hearing people enjoy their discovery of it. And whether it's been groups that are coming along, or even finally just a place where a pair might be able to just look and take in a sense that in many ways, these are enduring wonders that we're so lucky to be part of, which is the magic of nature, water, and architecture, and Longwood Gardens. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Eric and I would also like to welcome all of you. We're really happy to be here with Paul, Michael, and Marion, and to talk about Longwood Reimagined and our work on the project as the landscape architects. We would like to note that we're presenting not just on behalf of ourselves and of Doug Reed, who is unfortunately not able to be with her this evening. He sends his regrets. But of the many colleagues in the office without whom this work would not exist, in particular, Jeremy Martin and Nuit Morales. So let's get started. When you talk to people who are passionate about plants, about gardens, you'll find very often there is a story about where that love began. Sometimes it is a specific moment, a singular awakening, tied to the experience of a particular place at a particular time. But often it is something that grows slowly at the elbow or even the knee of someone you love who loves plants, a parent, grandparent, neighbor, teacher, or friend who opens your eyes to the wonder of the world around you and the opportunity and responsibility in creating and caring for the natural places in which we live. It is a passing of knowledge, of an ethic, and often even of cherished plants themselves, from one generation to another, tying them together through time. The act of garden making requires vision, careful observation, an understanding of the art and science of plants, patience, planning, and importantly, letting go. As landscape architects, our work is founded on a deep and particular understanding of the specific places we've had the privilege of working, their histories, ecologies, and communities, and the careful observation and documentation of the patterns that result from the natural and cultural systems that play across the land. We work to reflect what we understand to be the truth of the past of the place, past and present, and to project that toward the future in a way that ensures the work can grow and meet the needs and aspirations of the land, institutions, and communities with whom we collaborate. We seek to engage the possibility within the things we cannot control, to offer opportunity for the more powerful reading of phenomena of the natural world, a deeper knowledge of the other creatures with whom we share space, and a more powerful experience of the art and abstraction in the landscape. The work is both structural, creating frameworks for movement, viewing, gathering, and rest, and sculptural, with a strong focus on grading, bringing both ecological performance and art to the work and allowing people to see and experience their landscapes in new ways. But plants are at the foundation, and they remind us that when you're working on the land, change is inherent at the scale of seasons, of years, of generations. And that is both the beauty and the incredible challenge in creating meaningful landscapes. Gardens are places of transformation and revelation that tie people to place across generations. The opportunity to work at Longwood among gardens and natural lands of both historic and contemporary significance to be a part of this remarkable aspirational transformation was a unique opportunity. One that allowed us to engage so many of the questions we care about, the ideas we are fascinated by, the range and complexity of work that challenges us, and the acumen and experience of collaborators that expand both our horizons and our knowledge. It has been a very special experience, and we look forward to sharing some of that with you this evening. So this is where we started. With this common understanding from the work that came before us, that gardens are the repositories for the legacies of civilization and culture, and that Longwood is one of the great gardens of the world. Throughout its history, Longwood has not just engaged, but innovated around the art and science of garden making, established within an ethic of conservation of both natural lands and design landscapes. It is, of course, renowned for its horticultural skill. But among its botanical peers, which stretch across the globe, it is also uniquely a place that weaves theater, fine art, music, education, and hospitality into the expression and experience of its lands and landscapes. And is that unique imagination and determination to be an institution that is always evolving that underlay the vision for Longwood Reimagined. To imagine a garden or an institution's future requires looking back in order to look forward. to understand the particularities of place, their meaning, and how they accrued over time. Then you can start to consider how design might imagine the future.
This question of the particularities of place that Kristin raises is something that we do always in our work. But as Paul said, I grew up coming to Longwood as a kid, and it is probably one of the reasons I am a landscape architect. So the particularities of this place was especially meaningful for me. And finding a way to transform, but not undo or change in ways that didn't feel authentic was at the core for us. And frankly, I couldn't put terms to this when I was a kid, and probably not even when we started this, but that relationship between the ridges and the valleys, these are the pieces of the DNA that make Longwood what it is. The making of space for gardens and architecture, moments of planarity in that rolling fields. And this long linear circulation network that draws you from east to west, often lined by large canopy trees. These are the pieces of what makes Longwood what it is. As I said, we had to find that in part. I mean, Marion and Michael had already raised this question of the strength of the ridge, but we did what we often do, which is to begin to draw, to test, to learn about a place. And so here we start with the aerial photograph. We lay over it the topography, the lines that are the contours that show you grade, and we can see through that. Not everyone can. And what you begin to see is that expression of that long ridge and its relationship to the way in which the buildings occupy it. And as I said, the building, the West Conservatory, had already been envisioned as occupying this site. So the question for us wasn't, where should it go? But how should the site start to evolve to make it as if that building always wanted to be there and always was there? And so we started looking at the patterns here on the top, an existing, and below a kind of a proposition for how building and garden relate to each other. Thinking that the West Conservatory was an opportunity actually where building and garden could be more nuanced and transparent, and where the Western kind of garden could dissolve out into that larger landscape. The lines of trees and those long circulation patterns which drive much of the valley experience, we looked at how we could bring that to the ridge. And really above us here, the long line of trees that now links 3 generations of architecture from the east to the central to the west. And here zooming out and looking at how this all sits in that larger landscape, the relationship of the gardens to the greater meadows of the Brandywine. And here Conservatory Road, which you see to the west, always being almost like a hard line to the Abandi. And was there a way to weave those together so that the Abandi comes in to the core of the garden and that ridge feels like it reaches out into the distance and breaks down the boundaries of the garden itself? So I do want to take a moment and sort of look at the pieces of the puzzle that Marion and Michael have already started to talk about. Here, of course, is the plan as it was realized. It holds together, I think, very well. And I will say, I think people understand it, but it is always, and this project of doing this lecture was good for us, going back and looking at the scale of change by looking back at these old photographs, recognizing what wasn't available to the public and how transformative making this available, how we represented it, and then, of course, what you have all experienced today. And I think if this feels really natural and logical, then we've done our job. But it is fair to say that the process of design is not simple, it's not easy, and this maybe makes it look linear, but I think our team will recognize it was not. So the sketch that Marion and Michael showed at the beginning, a sketch that we did early on in the process, which is how do trees and landscape begin to relate to this building? And then a bunch of ideas in between, some of which we realize now were probably not very good. And it's good that they stayed on the cutting room floor. But out of those long processes of work came a building and a landscape that really do feel incredibly integrated. It also wasn't easy in terms of the amount of work. So there, you're sitting under there today. That's the amount of excavation that happened, putting that roof back on top to make a landscape that feels like a landscape, and then building the systems that enable that above. And this image looking back, which I really love because it shows you the scale of earthwork and landform that it took to get to what feels like it was always there. Just drawn one other way, it's important to recognize that actually, even though we talk about that ridge, it didn't read as strongly as it does today. And the earth that was under here has been moved just further west to patch that ridge line and that edge back together, and to create really what you see today, places where we filled even as much as 10 feet deep to make that. And on the top to create a relatively level and fully accessible plane, and now finally fully accessible ways to get from the ridge down to the valley that weren't possible before. Put together, really, it creates this syncopation between the courts, the groves, the promenades, the buildings. And this image of that central grove, it does feel so amazingly porous. But again, just like Marion showed you, the kind of pieces of the building that are living, breathing systems, under the ground, there are 100 living, breathing, complex systems that enable that paving in the central grove to continue right over and not allow us to have those trees, but allow us to walk right over them. The alleys that are above your head are also, again, on the roof. And so a whole set of living systems that enable those trees, we believe, to live for generations ahead of us. Together, they make the space that allows the great conservatory to find its place on the site, to change over time, and really to make accessible the most really revelatory moment on the site, which is the Western Grove.
Many of you will remember the former home of Longwood's bonsai collection. The beauty of the specimen and the skill in maintaining them was clearly evident, but the room for display was limited and removed from direct guest experience. A place for a more elevated display for the collection was a goal of the project from the start. But when the site design revealed available space between the new administration building and the West Conservatory, the idea of a dedicated courtyard came into view. This became even more exciting when Longwood was offered a remarkable gift from the Kennett collection, one of the finest in the world, and equally remarkably right down the road. This gift not only expanded Longwood's collection, but their ability to share the profound breadth of this centuries-old practice, founded on careful observation and a deep patience. The importance of the expanded collection and the long, narrow dimensions of the space suggested garden as gallery. Every element in the garden's character and composition was studied extensively. This is an example of how we used rough digital models and precedent images to test options for the design. How solid or open might the enclosure be? Should the display be continuous or episodic? And how could canopy create a language of groves on the ridge that also provide shade for the bonsai and guests alike? The vision that evolved was of a courtyard garden where 8-foot-tall hornbeam hedges would enclose the long, narrow space and also create intimate rooms within it, allowing the collection on display to unfold slowly, revealing itself as guests proceeded through the garden. Yakasugi or charred wood end walls and carefully proportioned cypress pedestals would allow Longwood multiple ways to curate the collection, now allowing them to display dozens of bonsai at a time while highlighting their individual forms, foliage, and seasonal bloom. Renderings like these helped us to understand the totality of the design and to study how larger bonsai could be set in silhouette in front of cast stone panels or in the round in larger pea stone areas. The courtyard's material palette and ways the garden's detailing focused on craft referenced both Japanese garden-making traditions and the beauty in imperfection, while avoiding an attempt to mimic a traditional Japanese garden. The planting palette is simple so as not to distract from the collection. In addition to hornbeams, a grove of 10 Yoshino cherry trees and a pervasive Hakanakloa ground plane animate the garden, providing shade and increasing the intimacy of the experience. One especially beautiful element for us is a set of 12 solid white oak benches salvaged from fallen trees, whose knots and checks tell the unique story of the individual tree from which it came. In the evening, the lighting design transforms the garden, adding mystery and providing an entirely different reading of both the collection and the space in which it sits.
I think the second revelation for me is the Cascade Garden as part of this. What we learned about the Cascade Garden went well beyond the physical conditions of it. It was to recognize Burle Marx' belief or sort of paired beliefs in the inherent but fragile beauty of the nature of his home forests in Brazil, and the conservation ethic that he brought to that, frankly, something more important than ever in our current moment. And the belief in the power of landscape as public art in making public realm places that engage people deeply through landscape. As you know, it was embedded into the sort of warren of greenhouses, and it was in the area in which the new conservatory was planned. We did spend a lot of time with the team trying to understand what the experience of arrival, and I do think this condition that it was at the end of the long circuit through the conservatories, and you came in at one level and down and out another. That was very much what it was about. It was a found condition, as Paul said. He was given this. He didn't make that condition, but he made something of it, and it was very integral to the building and to the garden and how we conceived it. So when the question was, where would it go? We knew that it needed to be part of the key itinerary through the garden and to have an opportunity to be understood within that totality, but to give it a moment of special opportunity. We worked with a number of great advisors, including Anita Beresbeitia, who is an expert on Roberto Burle Marx. And I think that that process really helped us deconstruct and understand how the ideas that he was engaging were being felt through the garden. And they really come down to the relationship between stone, that beautiful masonry, the flow of water, plants, all of which we drew here, and light, which we didn't try to draw because I'm not sure how we would draw that. But the light is a critical part of this, and Anita was very strong in helping us think about that. And so this process of deconstructing the garden was literally every piece of stone removed, cleaned, numbered, set aside so that it could be brought back in the same exact set of relationships. The other question for us was how to bring it up to date. It was not accessible to meet current codes. And so I'm going to flip back and forth. We made a very kind of surgical and subtle change to make that central path now actually provide true accessibility, but to work very hard not to change your human relationship to the water and the elevation and the plants. And so at the end of the day, hopefully nobody knows that there are a few inches less in the rise of that slope, and that the experience of moving through this garden is much the way Burle Marx imagined it. The other great opportunity for us was to create the anteroom, the courtyard that leads you in to this garden. It's an opportunity now to interpret Burle Marx, to kind of pause and get ready to enter something completely different. And of course, it navigates that extra grade to bring you into the garden at the upper level. And one of the fun experiments was to think about how to do something in the spirit of Burle Marx, his love of mosaic and paving patterns. Here at the bottom, a series of mock-ups of different ways of using this marble paver to create a surface. And at the top, working with local craftspeople to actually make this a handmade thing. To keep the handmade quality, they were each given a set of stones to put in place. And then so that the hand of individual masons didn't read in one place, they actually circulated around the site so that it actually is a kind of group effort of a series of masons to make something in the spirit of Burle Marx's.
Garden of the West Conservatory. The design for the Garden of the West Conservatory began with Longwood's ambition to celebrate plants from the globe's 6 Mediterranean ecoregions. The original Med House was to be dismantled as part of the larger project, and the new conservatory offered the opportunity to bring new scale and new vision to the experience of the Mediterranean at Longwood. The decision to focus on the Mediterranean plants was not just an interest in replacing a lost guest experience, but recognition of the contemporary importance of understanding global plant communities and the ways they have evolved over centuries to thrive in challenging environments. In this case, the ability to survive on very little water. As Paul said, traditional conservatories often explore communities as exemplar ecologies with individual specimen of many different plants. The vision for the new conservatory was not so much to arrange a botanical index as to create a unique garden under glass that celebrates the character of the Mediterranean, where both wild landscapes and cultivated gardens are defined by an inseparable relationship among stone, water, and plants. So connecting to the Cascade as well. We were inspired by Longwood's existing conservatories, Pierre Dupont's love of fountain gardens, and as he himself had been, by other great gardens of the world, to conceive of the new garden as one that connects water to sky. Early on, we worked to understand the 3 components of water, stone, and plants, their proportions, expressions, how they would weave together into a coherent garden. In this diagram, we pulled those layers apart to describe each as its own system. The overall structure of the garden's ground is expressed as a series of shallow stepped plains with pools and channels combining to fashion 3 planted islands. Water is given dimension, darkening as it deepens. The stone walks, brick terraces, and pea-stone maintenance paths reference traditional garden materials while operating at a scale that can accommodate Longwood's large visitorship. Tree planting creates moments of enclosure, while low planting carpets the islands, drifting southward into the pools. There were many months of iterative study of each of those elements, refining proportions, relationships, and expression. This early concept diagram describes a way of understanding the continuum of water along the crystalline ridge, that within the conservatory landscape, water is atmospheric, a medium for planting, elegant, it catches the light, it changes the sound of the space. And in the West Conservatory, it would be all of these things, as well as harvested and reused within the gardens and building systems, as Michael and Marion described. At the other end of the spectrum of studies was this, a full-scale mock-up of proposed pools and ridges that Bancroft Construction, the construction manager on the project, and longtime Longwood partner, made during COVID. So this was kind of a bonkers experience because we drove down here and we were all masked up and we all stayed 6 feet apart from each other for the entire day. But it really allowed us to see and understand the scale of each of the water feature elements, test the water action, select the garden's materials by being able to see them wet and dry. And it really helped us all build a great deal of confidence around where the design was at this critical moment. And frankly, it was just exciting to get out of drawing and see it in real life. So that was a very fun experience. And then there's the planting design. As I said, the garden stretches across 3 islands. Those to the east and west are conceived of as sisters or variations on a theme, with the central island smaller and distinct. Trees provide scale and shade and dramatic contrast of character between the pendulous, lithe canopy of the acacia to the north and the bird-like folded fronds of the Bismarck palms in the center. Rows of Italian cypress and bay laurel to the east and west provide verticality and more formal moments of hide and reveal. The counterpoint to those larger, more orthogonal structuring elements is a composition of low shrubs and perennials that carpet the islands. Many have billowy forms and small leaves, reflecting the plant's way of responding to climates where water is precious. Espalier trellises host citrus, and vine structures allow flowering vines to cantilever over the south walk, reflecting the old world tradition of training plants for production and putting a point of emphasis on Longwood's own skill in cultivation. Getting to the final plan of the garden required, again, tens of iterations, and we studied it in every way we could, including on the left, workshops with Longwood, working around the table, using very rough models and precedent images to structure the garden. To get the structure of the garden in place, you can see Paul evaluating our current idea in the foreground, and then later working with Michael, Marion, and their team at Weiss Manfredi to create more detailed models to test the garden's massing in and around the conservatory structure. It is really important to say that the palette for the garden is the product of years of incredibly close collaboration with Longwood's horticulture department. The garden required a set of plants, many of which had never been seen at Longwood before, that met our collective design intent, but also one that would be successful under glass in Pennsylvania's humid climate, and we required on their deep knowledge and expertise to get that list right. The process of selecting and sourcing plants was extensive. We made several trips to nurseries in California to confirm who could provide the base stock and do the contract grow, to review progress on the growing, and finally, before shipping, to confirm quality and inspect for pests. And it looks like an amazing set of trips where we were all very much in love with plants, and it certainly was. But on the bottom middle, he's here today, you can see Chad diving head first into one of the agave Americanas chasing a snout weevil. So there was, there were a lot of ups and downs on these trips. Seasonality is, of course, a key part in Longwood's horticultural experience, and although this garden is intentionally more focused on a permanent collection, it will still have different characters throughout the year. At times, it will be mostly in bloom. At others, foliage will be the dominant expression, and texture and hue will rule. Those varying expressions are supported by up to 5 different seasonal elements, whose addition expands the diversity of the garden, its beauty, and the diversity of the guest experience over the course of a year. The construction of the garden was incredibly complex, and we worked every day very closely with both Weiss Manfredi's team and Bancroft's. At its simplest, the garden is a series of large pots, but pots that need to be waterproof to make sure they didn't leak into the habitable space below. They had to support water feature piping, root zone heating, electrical and irrigation systems, as well as carry custom soils and all of the plants. So that's tens of guys working on different trades all at the same time in each other's way while the garden comes together. There were additional moments of coordination with cranes that needed to install the largest plants safely, and those were not without some tense moments. But we got there, and we are so pleased to share the result of everyone's hard work. I know many of you have had the opportunity to visit the garden, but we thought we'd take you through a few photos that were taken just after installation was completed. So Michael and Marion shared this photo. And I think it's a beautiful one for them to select and for us to select, because I think it is remarkable. I mean, it was no small thing to try to dodge their beautiful arcing set of the colonnade of the columns and land a garden in it that feels both incredibly tied to that architecture, but its own order as well. And I think this is a lovely photograph to understand how integrated and really married those components are. Here you can see one of the active rills with the simpler Clivia planting looking toward the Bismarck Palm Grove. Within the grove, with the intentionally stonier character of the grove, overlooking the pools, and you see the vine structures. Eventually, those will stretch all the way across the south pass and create a kind of billowy aerial canopy. And this, finally, the view to the western sunset, which emphasizes one of the most dramatic differences between this conservatory and the historic, its transparency. Where sunsets and snowfalls will change the way visitors experience the garden, it is the conservatory most fully in conversation with the landscape outside of it and with the sky. Gardens take time, and these are at the very beginning. They will evolve with the years and the influence of the many different hands that will care for them. Our hope is that they will last for generations and become a part of the rhythm of visitors' lives, as we have so powerfully seen is true of the work that came before us. Thank you.
So just a few questions for you. And I'm just going to throw these out there and whoever wants to speak can. So what was your inspiration for this project and what role did Longwood's legacy play in helping to inform your vision? Each of you touched on that in your remarks, but can you just build upon that just a little bit? No.
Is this one on? All right. So in a sense, I think you heard, with Paul's question and from all of us, different things that were sources of inspiration. And yet for us, I think the richest inspiration was the fact that Pierre Dupont took this piece of land and rather than allowing it to be developed, first thought about preserving what was here. And the woods, in fact, were what inspired that. Then the idea of the magic of topography and place being drawn into focus by the idea of structuring gardens, which was his inspiration as he traveled the world and brought it here, all with the lens of a crazy engineer who could invent almost anything. And so that idea that there's a beauty of both preservation and invention, and in a sense of display and something that is unexpected and yet magical, that was what was inspiring for us. And in a sense, we were overwhelmed and humbled as we began.
Is this one on? Oh, yeah, works. Okay. Eric and I talked about this a little bit recently, and we didn't really touch on this significantly in the talk, but I think one of the things that struck us in our early days of learning more about Longwood from Michael, Marion, and Paul and the whole Longwood team was the joy that Pierre Dupont took in not just building these gardens, but sharing them with family, and his decision then to create an institution that was allowed to, that would eventually share it with all of you and us. And so that joy in not just making gardens, because, lots of people do that and keep them private, but in really sharing the beauty and the power of those places with others. And so how the new project could really be it would solve a lot of problems and be inspirational, but feel incredibly welcoming to everyone, recognizable as a part of Longwood, but, welcome people who knew it well and who had never been here before.
Yeah, I'll just say, as a student of and teacher of garden history, the relationship between like the beautiful and the sublime is something that has always fascinated me. And this is a place that does that incredibly well. There are moments of quiet and pause, and where you just feel surrounded by the most beautiful things. And then there are those moments of awe and surprise and scale, and it is sublime. And I think they're just the pairing and the relationship between those different experiences. I feel like it was something we talked about a lot in our meetings. What is going to bring people out of their seats a little bit and change their experience in a meaningful way. And frankly, that's not a conversation we have with most of our clients. And so this was a moment where that was an amazing opportunity.
So what does your involvement in Longwood Reimagined, this place, and garden making effort mean to each of you personally?
Can you hear me? I'll try it. We love technology, especially when it works. I grew up in Italy, so I had the real pleasure of seeing the reciprocity between great architecture and great gardens. So when Mary and I came here 14 years ago, I think I felt instantly at home. But I think it was more than just the garden. I think, as we've all said, there was a kind of a social agenda, which was to kind of make these gardens public. And I think we started our practice doing a number of pro bono projects. So the sense of there being a larger mission about thinking about beauty as a larger gift to a larger public was, I think, very much rooted in the DNA of Longwood. Certainly it was important to Pierre Dupont, I think, to Paul and his staff and the board. And I think that's what we hope, or I hope for sure, will continue to be part of the legacy of what I the four of us and the Longwood team have brought to this kind of incredibly precious and eventful moment.
Well, I'll just say, because, I grew up coming here. One of the things I remember most is coming here as a high school student when I got my driver's license and I could get away from my parents, and I would bring my friends. And I think this sharing thing is important, like sharing something you love with other people. But I got here, we got here today, we walked around the conservatory. There is a smell when you walk into those spaces that, like, it goes back to, childhood, Eric. And I think the feeling of health, peacefulness, mental, like, you just lose all of that stress when you walk into this place. And again, at times like this, there's a lot of crisis, there's a lot of stress. I don't know, something about being part of a place that is all about the antidotes to those things has felt, again, incredibly personal and meaningful.
I think that, all of us here clearly deeply believe in what Longwood has deeply believed in, but it wasn't always here. And I think for us, the thing that is so compelling is that this is an invention, and it's a studied invention, and the degree of preparation, planning, thinking, organizing, curating, actually hibernating some plants that may in fact not be able to make it to prime time into the into the greenhouses. As you know, some olive trees never made it here, even though they traveled all the way from California to discover that they weren't yet ready for prime time. So the sense that for us, what's humbling is that most people, when they think about architecture, they'd say, okay, we got to photograph it, and we got to photograph it right away because it will never look its best after the days go by. The amazing thing about landscape and architecture together is that it will never look its best until the days do go by and the years go by. And the very first project that we ever worked on was indeed a park. We won an international competition, and we asked the landscape architect who was advising us on when we would photograph. And Michael and I were like, do we do it in April or do we do it in May? And he's thinking about it because we planted 217 trees. And he said, in 5 years, it might be okay, but I really think your best photographs are going to be about in 15. And so in a sense, what we love is the kind of impatience that you could say we have to get to the future is one where we're actually so, in a sense, humbled by the gift of what it takes to create a landscape, which is every bit as difficult as doing architecture. And then the magic, which Eric talked about, of the sublime, is ultimately the gift that it offers and keeps on offering.
What's left? I think all of you who make gardens know that creating gardens is an incredibly personal experience, and you put your whole heart into it. It is frustrating, and things die, and bugs come and eat things, and and you're just, you want it to work and it doesn't work. And this process, you could just multiply that times 1 billion, and that is what it was like to try to pull this project together, because it was so complex and it was so bespoke, and it was, you're dealing with so much of it over structure, and the complexity was just like nothing else we've ever worked on. And at the same time, you're bringing your truest and kind of most fragile self to the art of trying to bring something that feels beautiful and welcoming to people, 7 years down the road. And so I think it was just very emotional. I think that it was emotional to complete it, and to be able, it's still emotional when I come and visit it now, that it took incredible teamwork and determination and belief and some tears sometimes. And, I don't think I can put into like a simple word what it meant to me. But to bring a garden to fruition that has the potential to have power in other people's lives, and that they can then take that to people that they love and care about, that was really very special for all of us.
Okay, so I'm asked this question all the time. That people always ask me, do you have a favorite garden at Longwood? Do you have a favorite place? And I rarely answer this question because I'll have no favorite child. So I'm going to ask you the question, do you have a favorite part of this project?
That is like asking.
I definitely do. I think my favorite part of the project is there is never one place or one moment that ever feels or looks or behaves in the same way. And the sense that it is forever different and forever changing is so different from most architectural projects. And that really is my favorite part. It's not the place, it's the place of change that is enduring. And it's that sense that somehow the generosity of Longwood's spirit, Pierre Dupont's spirit, comes through with this gift of place, time, light, water, and growth.
Paul, that is a cruel question because it is like asking a parent, which is your favorite child? And I know that it'll be interesting to hear our colleagues. I think there was a moment where the conservatory was almost finished and there were a few people working, planting, trying to kind of clean the glass. And the sun was setting and you could see the beautiful grove of plane trees and that sense of inside and outside and the sense of this kind of infinite horizon, which is so beautiful in the Brandywine Valley as the sun was setting, was one of those moments that it did bring tears to my eyes.
Well, I mean, the West Grove and the thing we didn't do is, to me, the revelation. And we did a lot of work to make that, both to preserve it and to make it part of the garden and to make the Abandi part of the garden. But to me, there is something about arriving after this sequence of spaces at that moment of expanse and a change of scale, which I think is transformative.
That's one of my favorite places too. I think it's just surprising because it, we didn't think of it as one of the things that took the most work, although it was complicated in its own way. I think that, there's a way that being able to get to that edge and to have the prospect and beneath the kind of age of that canopy, you get that moment of kind of deep time, the Pierre Dupont time. And then because you're looking westward, it feels like you're also looking to the future. And so that is I think it's a very powerful moment. And if you step back, and I agree with you also, Michael, but if you step back like a couple, thresholds into the West Conservatory and you get that connection from that, the transparency of that building and the way that that new Mediterranean garden is always going to be in conversation with those plane trees. There was a point even earlier when the steel had just gone up and you could stand there and you were down, I don't know, were you down like 4 or 5 feet? And so you're sort of like here looking out of the building, but you could see that plane tree through just the steel structure before there was any glass or anything. And you just understood that kind of powerful, powerful conversation between the newest thing at Longwood and one of the oldest things at Longwood. And so I think that conversation is.
I'm just going to add one thing about the favorite part. And this is that when you work on something that's a plan with colored blocks that describe certain functions and locations, and you work on it for a really long time with a very deliberate and caring meter and method, the moment when they brought the excavators in there and they started tearing everything down, there was like, yay, no turning back now. And so in some ways, a favorite place or moment is standing on there and the completely devastated site and thinking, we're going forward.
Okay, so there were so many pieces and parts to this project and aspects to it, because it's not just one project, it's many projects within one. So was there one particular aspect of the project, and I know that there were probably many of these, but was there one challenge in particular that was new for you, unexpected, or that comes to mind that makes it unique in your design experience?
Maybe I'll start. There's kind of silence here, so my colleagues are deep in thought.
You can't say the client.
No. There was a moment, Paul, where you're here, and as Marion said, things are starting to kind of come apart, and you are struck with a level of humility and terror. We are undertaking an incredibly ambitious project, and how can we make sure that whatever new is both respectful, but also has its own identity? It's like literally like bringing a child out into the world. And it's both that sense of terror. Are they going to succeed? Are they going to thrive? But also incredible joy, knowing that the kind of DNA, we hope, is there and present. So that sense of giving birth, I think, is very real for, I think, all of us who are in the kind of creative world. You're bringing something that never existed into a conversation with other elements that have a very deep and rich history.
I mean, I don't know if this is quite the right place, but I do think the work on the Cascade Garden was incredibly challenging as an intellectual exercise. We knew that there had to be change, and we had to build an argument around how to preserve and extend the life of that garden to ourselves, to Barley Marx lovers, to a set of consultants, including Burle Marx's office today, who was part of the conversations about how to extend the life of that garden. And that process of understanding it and intellectualizing something was hard work. And I will also say that it is an amazing testament to Longwood's belief in gardens and gardens as works of art that the complexity of that process has enabled that garden to exist and be moved and really celebrated in a new way. That you think about preservation of artworks, of paintings, what goes into those, what goes into preserving buildings. Very rarely is that kind of effort put into preserving a landscape. And I think that was hard work for us to figure out and to understand. And I think for me, it's one of the most important parts of the process.
I would say that the biggest challenge is that when you're in a cultural campus that has had an identity that at nearly 100 years old has established a voice that we all respect and know and love, that can be highly inhibiting when you're trying to bring something new. So I think that for us, it was gathering courage, in fact, from the fact that Pierre Dupont was still an inventor. This thing didn't exist before he actually dreamed it up, and he had crazy engineering doing these fountains out there. And so that idea of invention and innovation gave us courage as we tried to make some buildings hide in plain sight, like the one you're in right now, make others that were hidden, like the Cascade Garden, visible and central, and then making a companion to the historic conservatory that could somehow feel magically transparent, but unlike these big vaulted, conservatories that we see going on around the world at super scale, have that same intimacy of architecture and the kind of glass and gardens feeling woven together to create intimacy. So it was all of it, all at once, with, I might add, a very, very involved client team and collective.
In a good way.
In a great way, never better, never better. But in a sense, as Michael mentioned, it's like raising children. Well, everybody was invested in these very children, very, very much so. And so actually recognizing, though, that in a sense, we were entrusted to effectively raise this little family together. So hopefully that it can actually become a gift to everybody for the centuries to come.
This was a child with many parents. Picture that.
So one final question here, because I want to make sure there's enough time for all of you to meet Kristin and Eric and Marion and Michael. And I'm curious about your perspective and thought, because you've been such an important part of this project and this transformational moment for Longwood, and in many ways a reignition of our legacy in a lot of ways. And so how does this project, Longwood Reimagined, speak to the future of public gardens and public horticulture?
Well, I'll start. I mean, I think it goes back to where this all started, which is this notion of sharing the joy of plants. And I think there are so many public gardens that have focused on very specific didactic messages or scientific educational opportunities, and that has a place. But there is also a place for celebrating the beauty of garden making and the celebration of plants as part of those compositions. And I think actually, that is not new for Longwood, of course, that is your legacy, but I think it is actually more present in many other gardens because many gardens are looking for ways to diversify who comes, to speak to broader audiences, to find ways to communicate with people of cultures very different from maybe where they come from. And oddly, gardens, even though they're deeply cultural, like they come from Italy and France, and there are American garden traditions and Japanese garden traditions, there is something deeply universal about them, which I don't know how to describe, whatever. There's no way to understand it entirely, but there's something deeply universal. And that is the tradition here, which reaches masses in ways that lots of other ways of communicating with people don't. And frankly, I think that will find its way even more and more into the public garden and world.
Yeah, I think one other way to build on that thought, Eric, too, in terms of the importance of public spaces, I'll just kind of open it up, is that I think we're living in an increasingly digitized world where we're seeing generations incapable of understanding what it means to touch a tree or to smell what it means to kind of walk into a kind of a cluster of rosemary. Similarly, architecture too, I think it's increasingly digitized and we forget the power of architecture is physical. It reminds us where our bodies are in space. So I think we are deeply committed, as is Longwood, to making sure that the art of architecture and the art of landscape and garden design be foregrounded in a way that is as crucial now as it ever was. And I think there's a sense of the publicness of that is absolutely essential.
I agree. Eric talked about public gardens being very focused currently on really making sure that everyone feels welcome, inviting all of the various communities that are near them through their doors. I think coming out of COVID, there's also a lot of focus on gardens as places of healing and respite, and Longwood, in its focus on beauty and its focus on education and its focus on hospitality. I mean, I have not met a person here who's been like, get off the lawn. It's even if they want to be, even if they're like, get off the lawn, man. They always, can I help you? And so welcome, can I answer the questions? I think that having that foundational spirit and the opportunity to use this project as a way to heal people, to elevate their idea of beauty and aspiration and change, to educate that gardens are places of respite, but also advocacy in the Cascade Garden. I think there's just the potential for the project is really kind of endless because they will bring their endless imagination to its many different aspects. So I'm excited to see where they take it.
I'll just add one small thing because I think they've been so well said just a moment ago, but now more than ever, when our social worlds and our ecological worlds are increasingly fragile and diminishing as things we can count on, this is when what Longwood is doing means so much.
Well, we give them all a big round of applause. You can clearly see what a joy it has been to work with Marion and Michael and Kristin and Eric and others on their design team. And when you're working on a project like this, it's all about the partnership and the community that you build around it and your shared vision around that. And you kind of become a family during that process, good and bad. And but working with Marion and Michael and Kristin and Eric, it has absolutely been a real joy for all of us. And the thing that many of you don't know is that when we work with such talented individuals like this on a project like this, we never let them go. They are always part of the Longwood family. So you're here and you're stuck with us forever. So thank you so much for all of you being here tonight. And thank you for your support of Longwood and this project. And thank you for the many things that I know that you have shared with us by email or survey or whatever about your joy that you've had from Longwood Reimagined. And so I just hope you'll keep returning, and I look forward to seeing you in the garden. So thank you.